Hello and welcome to the Wagtail podcast. And today I have Graham with me. It's really nice to see you, Graham. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question because Brianna and I were talking about, well, how do you how do you go about defining yourself or something like this? So I'm going to attempt to not define myself by the work that I do. So I am a 42-year-old man who has spent the last 8 years going very deeply into what it means to be a human living in this time of what I experience is the kind of dark night, early dawn of a new civilization. So for me, I'm holding point for like a future that hasn't yet landed but is already here, and that future is defined by a deep love, actually, and truth as love and love as truth, and that's the way that I always move in the world. So for me, unless I found the truth of something, I haven't found the love. So that's the way that I move in the world. And in a sense, that's actually the kind of work that I offer in the world too. And the kind of work that I offer it's really about emotional literacy, and helping people to kind of meet reality on reality's terms. So past the stories of the cultural conditioning, the way you were brought up, past your survival mechanisms and your strategies and your solutions, to actually just be yourself unashamedly, to not to be free from, but to free to be.
Mm.
Mm.
That's a nice description. So thank you.
Mm.
So we're just going to start. We start with everybody on the podcast of asking what your own personal definition is of wellness and resilience.
Huh. This is a really interesting question. So for me, like wellness is kind of like the first step, really. It's like the stabilizing force. And the way I would define it is that you have a personality. So your personality is kind of the way that you've adapted to suit the conditions of your environment. And some of that may be fixed. So it might be the kind of role that you play in a social group, or it might be your habits, for example, and it might be the way that you sometimes define yourself as your mind. So it's a kind of it's in a sense it's a kind of a false self. It's more like the outfit that you wear necessarily than what's underneath the outfit, like what's inside you. And it can be beautiful as well. It's like a vessel through which like something really magical can shine. But a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that that's who they are, when that's actually just a very small part of who they are. So for me, wellness is stabilizing that part of yourself in a way where you can lead a healthy life. And by healthy, I mean giving you the opportunities to really shine who you are. So wellness might be having a healthy body. It might be having a healthy mindset. It might be having good habits, routines, structures, systems, so that the really kind of magical part of you can actually do what it came here to do. So you're not defined by any of those other things. You're actually defined by like a core essence of you. And you may experience that in moments, or you may experience that quite often. But the way I would define that is when the critical mind or the director's commentary of your life is switched off, and you just find yourself in the experience of life almost completely indivisible from your environment and from the people around you. Because in that moment where you're in that flow, you're just surfing and you're singing. It's like yeah, when all the noise drops and you can just hear that really quiet whisper of your soul. And resilience is resilience for me has always been daring to go into the places that I'm scared of, to see actually that what I don't know is far more majestic than I'd ever possibly imagined. So every time I step into that place, I become more and more and more resilient, until eventually, like, so for example, when I first started working, I could only really work with 2 or 3 clients because I didn't have the emotional resiliency to actually do the kind of work that I was doing, because it involved holding people in very difficult situations, and I needed to be within my integrity to do that. Now I can hold lots of people doing the work because, like, I have an understanding of my kind of emotional reality that doesn't leak or bleed out into other people's experiences. That doesn't mean I'm perfect, but it does mean that I can do more and I can meet the challenges of life, this life and this life, with much more delicacy and grace and ease than I used to be able to.
I really love those definitions. And I think it's interesting what you said about director's commentary, and especially about kind of those rules that we grow up with, that either come from generations of parenting, or they come from a society or a culture that isn't really us. So I'm just going to go slightly off there and ask you, how have you been able to do that? Turn that director's commentary off or down and just be fully yourself.
So there's been a lot of different things. So there are what I've had to do is I've had to kind of find, it's like there's a antivirus software in my being, where when I feel certain things, I know that I'm not in alignment anymore, and I'm actually in a story or a loop or a pattern. Sometimes that can be somatic responses. Sometimes it can be the sense that I've been in this conversation before. Say, for example, if I have an argument with my partner and I perceive that she is ignoring me, it's like, okay, how do I feel somatically? Like, what's actually going on in my body right now? And was there ever a time where I felt like this in the past? So this kind of work of getting emotionally current is almost like time travel. So yes, you're going into the future to bring the future you into the present, because it's waiting for you anyway. It exists, it's all within you. But there's also the past version of you too. So you have these conflicts, like with life or with people, and often they're just repetitions of a pattern of childhood, and within that pattern there's a deep kind of core root emotional experience that hasn't yet been completed. So for me, I've done that in lots of different ways, but just to put a kind of broad cape over it, I would say most of it's trauma work for me. So it's been going into getting really curious, like, about why I'm having difficult experiences and what I make it mean, and how I can resource myself to be more resilient, actually. So, for example, in me, there's like a 3-year-old, there's a 5-year-old, there's a 7-year-old, there's a 9-year-old Graham, and he sometimes comes out in a way where it's not like I give space for him to come out. He just comes out without and takes over without me even noticing. So a lot of my work has been, okay, what does he need, and what needs to be acknowledged for him to feel like he can trust adult Graham, 42-year-old Graham, more than he currently does. And that sometimes that requires small adjustments, which would be more, I think, in the kind of wellness spectrum of things. And sometimes it requires much more, much deeper, more intense, more cathartic kind of work as well. So I've been kind of mixing lots of different disciplines and ways of doing that, some of which I offer, some of which I don't, some of which I seek from other people. And that's a really valuable thing that I've learned, is that it doesn't matter how much, like, I step into a leadership position, I need support. We're not designed to do this alone. The days of the person going into the cave, getting the transmission from source, or whatever you want to call it, whatever suits you, going up on the mountain, getting hit by the lightning.
Mm.
We can't rely on one person to do that for us anymore. So we all have to do that, but we can kind of hold each other's hands on the way up.
Mm.
So, of course, like in the moment where you go through the extremely, extraordinarily deep process, you do that alone. But up until that threshold, we can really support each other with that and prepare each other for that. And really knowing your body, knowing your mind, knowing how your personality operates is really critical.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you the next question, but I wonder if we could come back to that at some point. That kind
Yeah,
of
sure.
what are the wellness things and what are kind of the deeper cathartic
Mhm.
things. And but I love what you said about other people, because what I'm learning through any kind of wellness, however you define it, connection, other people is huge. It's really important. So I'll ask you about your journey first, and hopefully we'll talk about that a bit later. So yeah, so can you tell us a little bit about your personal journey into wellness and resilience?
Yeah, so this is interesting for me to share with you because obviously I knew you a long time ago. So this Brianne and I used to work together in a bookstore in a basement, and it's always really interesting to me the kind of people who would congregate in the basement because they felt more like my people somehow. I think the way I defined them at the time were kind of like really interesting and curious, kind of introverts, and that's kind of a little bit how we all were down there. And it was a very different kind of culture down there where we kind of shared a little bit more deeply. I think I found almost like when we would go up a level or another level in the building, it would be slightly more surface and even more surface.
Yeah, interesting you said that.
Yeah, it's funny. It was almost like the spiritual journey. We were going into the underworld.
Yeah.
So, so just to say about my personal journey, I'll kind of start at the beginning of the moment where I realized something had to change because I think that kind of encapsulates everything. Actually, I've been um, I've been living in Cambridge and working in London, and that meant a 90-minute round trip, or minimum each day, and I would find myself in the same train carriage with the same people day in, day out. I was in a relationship with my partner at the time. We'd been there for 12 years. You actually know her, Emma, and I had very little time to spend with her. I was extraordinarily tired from just all these commutes, the same people. And we would kind of glance at each other occasionally, and sometimes there would be a sense of joy, but mostly it was like, oh God, we're doing this again. I felt like I had put everything into trying to be successful. I had a good job. I could afford to do this commute. I was going places. I remember the Daily Telegraph got in touch with me, and they were like, "We want you to come and work for us." And so I was getting to a point where I was being recognized, and in a way, that's what I always wanted. I wanted someone to recognize me, and I didn't feel like anyone ever really saw me. That was my story. Um, and then one day, having done this commute for about half a year, I think it was, and just feeling like how narrow the spectrum between my joy and my sadness was. Like I almost felt nothing because there was nothing to feel. It was like my range was so small. We were coming into King's Cross on the train, and I looked out the window, and there was one of the guys with the high vis jackets working the train line. For a moment, I felt incredible envy. I remember just feeling like the amount of pressure like I put on myself, and I'd kind of externalized from other people putting on to me, and I felt like, oh shit, like I'd just love to do a job like that where I don't have to like worry about all this stuff. And of course, lots of assumptions, but the more meaningful moment was as I was staring at him and imagining myself in this life that he had. He actually turned around, and for a moment we made eye contact. And in that moment, I actually felt like my consciousness like zap almost into his body and his into mine, and had this moment where, for the first time in a really long time, I could actually see somebody and feel somebody, like not just the difficulty of being that person, but also like the tremendous joy of being that person. And I can feel it now. I couldn't stop crying.
Wow.
I was just and I had no defense. And you know, these people on this train, they kind of, in a weird way, they kind of know me, but they don't know me. And I
Yeah.
could see them like uncomfortably kind of shuffling, and I couldn't help myself. I was just like, I had no armor. And then when I got off the train, this is some time after everyone else has got off, I just sat down and I put my hand on my heart, and I was like, fuck, I really like this force that's moving through me right now. There's something really special about this, and I want to understand what it is. I would later come to define it as love, but at the time I didn't know what it was, because it was just, I hadn't felt it for so long. I
Mm.
hadn't felt it since I was maybe 7 years old. Not for that period of time. Like, I would look across occasionally at whoever my girlfriend was at the time, and I would get like a little moment, like a little overwhelm, like a little kind of, oh, I love you. And I'm like, oh, wow, where did that come from?
Yeah.
But I couldn't consistently be in that because it didn't feel safe for me. It felt like every time I would go into something, my whole nervous system would like collapse. It would, like, the tension in my ribs, like I couldn't breathe. It was almost like every time I felt like a deep emotion, my body would be like, mm-mm, we've learned not to do this. This isn't masculine. This isn't being a man about it. This is something that weak people do. And obviously, like, over time, what I've realized is that there's incredible strength and power and courage in being open to people. And the thing is that longing for like deep connection that I've always had, it comes. Like, it's always there, and I just have to open to it. It doesn't mean that I do it all the time, but it does mean that I actually understand like the technology of my body and my soul enough to be open. So that's my yeah, that's my piece. And since then I've done lots of different things to cultivate that inner sense, that kind of, I guess you would maybe define it as soul shine. So everyone has their kind of soul shine, and that's mine.
That's amazing. So can you tell us a little bit more then about yeah, Soulshine, and
Hmm.
what you've done to get yourself into that?
Yeah, this has been a really big curiosity for me about Soulshine, like what that actually is. And for a long time, I thought it was more vocational. So it was like you have a calling, like an external purpose, and then you go and step into that. So for me, at one point, it was being a hypnotherapist. For me, at one point, it was being a Reiki practitioner. For me, at one point, it was being a life coach, like lots of, or a sexological body worker. It was lots of different things that I thought was my purpose. And it's funny because when you said to me before we began this, like, people often define themselves by the roles that they do, and I think there's something really important in that. That's not your soul shine. Your
Mm.
soul shine is not what you do. It's who you are. So when you're completely undefended, so imagine yourself like completely undefended and like in the flow of life. What do you do? Maybe you sing, and it might not necessarily in the first instance be what the song sounds like, but the way the song feels in your body. It's a transmission. It's like when you relax and you open and you just allow the thing to come through you. And the way I kind of would define it, if I dared to, was more about, there's like a different kind of love almost that every person is able to be generous with in the world. And it might be that you have tremendous like will, like the will to love, or it might be the wisdom that comes through you. So the purity of love, or the embodiment of love. I think of tantrikas and dakinis and people like that. They embody this kind of love, like through the way they move, or I'm not sure how mature your audience is, but the way they make love, for example. Or it might be, and I want to include people who are religious. It might be the priest, the devotion to love. So there's or the beauty of love, like the musicians and the singers and the artists. It's like these are all different soul shine. And then I realized, like, well, this is possibly why I love actors so much, is because they're embodying this role so completely, like with so, to embody a role like that, you have to love that character, like no matter what that character's done or who they are, you have to feel them really deeply. So sometimes I would watch movies and I would be like, this performance is incredible, it's blowing me away, why am I responding like this? And it's like, it's Soulshine. Soul recognizes soul. So for sure, like when I'm walking down the street, there's those people who you kind of make eye contact with and you don't know why. A person comes up to you in the market and they share with you, there's something about you and I don't know what it is, but I just wanted to share that I love your presence and I love your gaze or whatever it is. And I do that all the time, by the way. Like if I see somebody, I'm like, okay, I need to tell that person that I recognize them in some kind of way. I need to give them some kind of indication. So that encouragement piece as well, like actually the courage to encourage.
That to me is kind of like really special, because I think I talked about it on the last podcast I did about love. It's only just recently where I've really felt like I have this capacity to love all people, not just those closest to me. And it's really interesting kind of coming to that conclusion. But I love what you said about just going up to people, and these are people you don't know, and
yeah, I mean, people I do know I'm pretty generous with, but people I don't know as well. I just want to, can I give you a reflection?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I'd always felt that about you when we worked together as well. You were generous with your time and you were generous with your affection as well. So I never, it always was clear to me, like where I stood with you as well, which I really liked. Like not everyone's like that, where they're clear. And then I kind of got to wondering, I was like, I wonder whether clarity is a form of love for Brienne, like whether actually being clear is like a way to express love. And can I just say a little bit more about love, actually?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So I think there are different levels to love as well. So on the human level, like I think love with a capital L is kind of, I don't say, for example, it's between you and I, like I don't give you the responsibility to love me in the way that I want to be loved, that I actually take that responsibility for myself. So on the more on the personal level, the personal heart, like I think that this is the way that love works. On a soul level, I think it's a deep recognition that you are me and I am you. So like if you ever have that kind of love with a person, it's really important to notice it, because that's, I think that's possibly for most people gonna be the real, the thing that really changes love for them is to recognize the other within themselves. There's a recognition piece that comes with that, where you realize that you are love. That can change somebody's whole life. And then there are other kinds of love which might be harder for me to define, and I don't want to get too conceptual, but there are broader, kind of wider dimensions of love that maybe don't carry the same kind of sense of romance or myth or story, that it's more like things are just the way they are, and that there could be a certain sacredness in everything that happens in this world, even some of the abhorrent things as well. I don't want to get too far into that, because that's more like a kind of would blow people away kind of a love, and you really need to experience that for yourself. But yeah, there are different layers and different levels of the heart and love, and the one that I like to spend time is definitely soul love. It's the most nourishing.
I love that. I'm interested in all those levels. Maybe we can have a conversation about that deeper level another time. Because it does fascinate me, that kind of that. So how do you recognize the soul love?
Cool. It's similar to some of the things that we talked about before. For me, it's a bodily sense, and also there's a certain kind of series of emotions that come with it as well. sometimes, like with the spiritual dogma, comes a little bit of a belief that emotions are not acceptable, or we need to master them. I would call bullshit on that. I actually think for some of us, like to be in our emotions, not to identify with them, but to allow them to be there, is a really core and critical thing, particularly if you've suppressed them. But for me, it feels like, not everyone's going to get this, but I'm going to share it anyway. It feels like the moment when we went from like standard definition 4:3 TVs into widescreen TVs at high definition. It's like all of a sudden, like the world becomes bigger. You're not in the wind tunnel of trying to perform or trying to get something. You're just like wide open, and you're not asking yourself the question of whether you love this person or not, or how you love this person or how you don't. You just simply love them, and it just pours out. So there's a generosity to it, and you're also at the same time including like the previous level of love as well on the more personal heart. So you may recognize them as a friend or a lover, or a brother or a sister, or a stranger, you know. So you also have that personal recognition at the same time, but you don't give as much space for it. So it's not about that so much. It's more about just the wide openness and the magic of the connection. Yeah, that's the way I experience it.
And do you feel like there's a lot of thought, isn't there, around being able to really truly love yourself and who you are before you can do that? Is that something that you kind of subscribe to?
Mostly, it's mostly my experience. So my capacity to love other people matches my own capacity to love myself by and large. However, there is a little bit of a danger with the self-love kind of speak, because it can be a little bit like it's like another thing that you're not doing well enough, if you see what I mean. It's like, if you can't love yourself, then you can't. So there's a little bit of a danger with it. And someone gave me like a pretty good metaphor for this once upon a time, is that there are three kinds of people, and they can undulate between three different kinds. They can be every single one of these other kind of people. There are planets, there are suns, and there are black holes. Most of us are planets, and sometimes we need to circle around the sun to feel the warmth. So you're not always going to be a sun. Black hole's another thing altogether. That's that's for another conversation. But it's good if you weren't modeled love when you were a child, for example, or you weren't modeled it in a healthy way, then you might still be playing out patterns, and self-love might be more of a strategy to get what you want rather than a truly embodied feeling. So to be with other people who embody that love, actually, like without too much question or consideration, it's just the way they are. It's good to spend time with those people, and to start to get reflections and reference points for yourself. Otherwise, it can be a little bit mental as a process, and it can be, yeah, like I say, a little bit self-critical. And it's my experience is that self-criticism is a defense mechanism and is a resistance to love. So anything that you can do to melt away resistance is going to be super supportive for you. Sometimes it might be getting professional help. Sometimes it might be you have a friend who really lights you up, and they're good at resourcing themselves as well. So they have the resilience actually to support you and be in their own experience at the same time. And yeah, don't be afraid to orbit a sun. And when you're a sun, don't be afraid to let some planets orbit you. You know? Just check in whether you're a planet or you're a sun. Sometimes I'm a planet. Sometimes I need to go into my cave and recharge and find my own source of love. And usually self-love comes online more when you've been through the deeper processes. So the wellness and the resilience is fantastic because it starts to develop a sense of inner trust because you're taking care of yourself, which is something maybe that someone didn't do for you in your childhood. So at least the parts of you that are a little bit in resistance to love are starting to come round because they see, hey, I can trust Brienne because Brienne gives me good food. She exercises me. She has her partner who's really nice to me. It's like I'm feeling good about the life situation that she's creating. But at some point, you're going to have to go into the deeper layers of the resistance to whatever it is, and that's when it starts to get more difficult.
Mm. So I wonder if we can talk about that now then, about, because the question I ask is about kind of tips and strategies, and we've already touched on the wellness type stuff and then the deeper cathartic stuff. So I wonder if you could give some idea of what those tips and strategies are for you.
So everyone's different, and that's a really important thing, is there isn't a one size fits all. That's very much a cultural conditioning story, that there's this kind of monoculture. Everyone should eat spinach, for example. I eat spinach, like I can't go to the toilet for 2 days. So not everything, there isn't a one size fits all. Not everything works for everyone. So you do need to start getting really curious, and there are things that you can try to see, like what kind of response, like your body, mind, your personality, and your soul has to these different things. So for me, meditation, for example, comes very easy. It was never a difficult thing for me, and the kind of experiences that I could do a lot of processing. So whatever material kind of came up, it was quite quick to be processed, moved, and then I could go into the deeper experience. But not everyone's like that. So meditation doesn't work for everyone, and particularly for people who have a very embodied form of trauma. So blunt force, for example, which I do actually have, but that's on a slightly deeper and different kind of layer or level of my being. So what I would say is embodiment practices are actually super good for a lot of people. Movement, dance, anything that puts you in a body, in your body in a way that that you can start to just lean into different pockets and parts of yourself, like expression, for example. Like it feels like expression is a really constipated part of society. So it's the freedom to express one's personal truth, for example, to express their body, to express their sexuality without the fear that they'll be chastised or shamed for being a sexual being. It's like the fallacy of like Adam and Eve, that the object becomes like the problem rather than the subject. It's I live in communities where it's all about allowing people to express themselves, and understanding if and when it infringes upon your boundaries is like your responsibility. So there's a huge responsibility piece here with the different tips and different strategies that we're going to use, and it's really about understanding things like, well, how do I navigate life? How do I make decisions? What kind of decisions do I make? There are lots of different ways of doing this. I mean, we can maybe put some links in the comments.
Yeah, that'd be great.
There are lots of great systems for this kind of thing. Like human design would be a really great system for just getting some reference points for yourself. So it's a esoteric system that's a little bit woo, but it actually gives you really actionable and things that you can do to test out, like your intuition, for example, or your instincts, or how do I know when I'm following the path? Like, so it almost gives you a crystal ball that you can kind of constantly look at and say, satisfaction is a guiding principle for me. So when I don't feel satisfied, I'm in my not self, my false self, my small self. And when I feel satisfied, I'm in my true self. It means that I'm headed towards something that feels good to me. So I would say to anyone, like, get really, really familiar with your somatic responses to things. Like, get really curious about why physical responses come up, and see how long you can stay with those physical responses too. Another brilliant modality that doesn't take more than more than 10, 15, 20 minutes to do, and it doesn't require you to be an expert in anything, is focusing. Hell, I might even post if I can, I might post a file or something like that in the comments. It's a guided process, and this is a really good one for more mental people who want to become more embodied. So the key word is introception. So our this additional sense that we have to notice our felt sense and what's going on in our bodies. We can start to use that information to guide us a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds really interesting, because I think not many people are aware of the tools that they can use to actually do those things. And you're right about, I think, and I can see the value of meditation as well, but there are lots of people that can't get on with it, or they think that it's another thing that they think they're failing at, actually, because some people think that meditation is going to be the key to inner peace, and then if they can't do it, they then feel they've failed at something. So I think it's great to have those other things that can help.
Yeah, there's a really kind of key thing here with the failure piece. So one thing is, like, failure is an incredible teacher. So it's not that you failed and you have to keep doing the thing until you get it or you master it. It could also be that there's something else for you that suits you, suits your constitution. So don't get stuck at yoga or meditation or whatever the thing is. Keep being curious, like, and don't be afraid to go into the embodiment as well. I mean, we live in a more kind of solar mental kind of age at the moment. I mean, we worked in Cambridge, right, where everyone's kind of very rational in a brilliant way, but very rarely are they embodied human beings. And some of us are more designed to be that way, and that's not spoken about so much. Like, there are kind of three beings, I would say, in this sense. There's a more kind of consciousness, mental plane kind of a person. There's an embodiment, more of a kind of, it's not necessarily sexual, but it is like seeing a certain kind of divinity in matter. So really wanting to be here, actually, on the earth, on the ground, feeling the nature, feeling the connection. And then there's the other kind of person who's more in the heart. So they're more about feeling and sharing from a more the embodiment of the heart than the embodiment of the sex or the embodiment of the mind.
Yeah. Okay, so that's really interesting. So basically, if you're one and you're trying to seek the other, but you can't, or it doesn't work, or it doesn't matter, does it?
It doesn't matter, and you might want to start exploring. Once you've got familiar with where you are and what your natural gifts are, you might want to get curious about where you're less expressed and you're less comfortable, and then it might be meditation's a good edge for you to explore. But don't go to the edge of something that doesn't work for you straight away. It's like, come back to that at a later date, because then it will support you once you kind of understand yourself a little bit more clearly. And then you can start to do that work. Okay,
that's really interesting. So yeah, it's great if you can drop us some links. So
yeah, sure. Just got to remember all of them.
Yeah. So the things you talked about already, would you say that was kind of like the wellnessy stuff or the deeper cathartic? Which camp does it fall into?
Yeah, I'd say in the first instance, it's more into the wellness. So it's certainly to begin with, and I think what can happen is you can have very deep experiences doing these kind of practices as well, and sometimes they can catch you by surprise. The important thing is that it's very rare that something would happen without you being ready to deal with it. And it might be that you need support or you need outside help, but usually when the unconscious kind of releases things, it's because you do have the capacity to deal with it in some way, shape or form. Like, I found this with my own experience. I'd always be, like, I don't know why I'm here, but I feel like I've resolved everything now, and maybe I can just lead a happy life. And then a new thing comes up, or a deeper layer of an old thing, and I'm like, okay, I see. This isn't like a job that I finished and I'm just going to go and do a new one. It's like, or I just finished my GCSEs. It's a constant education, and the more I know, the less I know.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
So can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of deeper strategies that people can explore?
Yeah, so once you get to a certain kind of level where you feel like your perception has changed, so you're less maybe identified with the personal self and starting to identify more and more from a soul place, which still includes the previous kind of personality part as well. When you start to get to that place where you're questioning things like meaning and purpose, what your soul shine might be, then you start to approach a kind of a threshold. And to cross over that threshold, you kind of need to complete certain things that you didn't complete in your childhood. So you need to kind of do things like, and this is wellness, but it's also like a little bit deeper than that. Nervous system, for example. So resetting the nervous system back to its original settings. For me, that only really comes when you go through, when you do the wellness concurrently with the deep cathartic work as well. So once you're able to go into those pockets and complete those experiences, then there's a certain kind of freedom that comes with that. The things that I've done for that have been somatic experiencing, for example, which is actually a wonderful way to develop wellness and resilience, but also to approach the material at a gentler speed. And I do want to say for people who are kind of looking for cathartic experiences that slow is fast. Okay. So don't necessarily go to the edge and jump off immediately. Like take your time, because there's a reason why you have this sort of this fear in your body. It's designed to keep you safe. It's a survival thing. So it will get highly activated if you try to go too far too soon. There will be a natural pace that will carry you. So when you get to that threshold, there are things like modalities that would support you, like core energetics, which is a deeply cathartic, spiritual, transpersonal psychology. You could even look into things like psychedelic therapy. I would caution against going into non-therapeutic containers. And what I mean by that is shamanic work is very powerful, but I would suggest to you that you find out about the therapeutic credentials of anyone who offers that kind of work. So that's really important, that they're not administering doses that are too high, that they really are able to understand and process your material, that they have also done their own developmental work as well. Because you don't want to be held by somebody who hasn't really done that, because when you find yourself in that place, you can't really trust the person to hold you there. So trust is a deep part. Inner trust and outer trust as well is a deep part of being able to cross over that threshold. Depending on what your wounding is as well, sexuality work is another way. I mean, because sexuality is so shamed and exploited and objectified by the culture, that to come into an integrated form of that with innocence and purity at the core. And I don't mean as a judgment. I don't mean like you shouldn't have sex with that person or have sex in that way. Actually, at a certain point, you can have sex in any way you want, as long as it's consensual and as long as your heart's involved. You can have a deep and profound experience, and it could look lots of different ways. So this is these are some of the ways that like I've approached things. And in a modality that you could jump into quite easily without too much background. Maybe you've done some good emotional resilience work and some wellness work, would be something like TRE, so trauma and tension release exercises, which draw upon the body's natural capacity to release trauma or to release tension. And it's done so in a way that doesn't get you hooked into the stories or the concepts or like the ideas. Like that stuff just comes out without you having to necessarily engage in it. Like, you know, why did it happen? Why did they do it to me? These are important things at some point, but this is a kind of discipline that just gives you the opportunity to start to release some of that. And actually the first time I did that, or the second time I did that, that was the first time, I think, since childhood that I had experienced like such a profound love after my first one-on-one session. I went outside to Cambridge train station. It took me about 40 minutes to walk 300 meters. And I sat outside like the noodle place, Wasabi, and it took me about 2 hours to eat what I was eating because I was in such a deep like bliss state of being with everything. And it really showed me something about the possibility of the kind of experience of life that I could have. I'm not necessarily saying that everyone will have that as a result of TRE, but I'm just saying, like, if you have an experience at one point or another, then it's possible that you can also have a very similar experience. So if you feel like you had a profound experience 20 years ago, don't give up hope that you won't be able to find yourself in that place again. I thought, well, childhood, even though actually in retrospect, I didn't have a very happy childhood, I would often tell myself, I wish I could be a little boy again and just be in the innocence and the play of life and without the director's commentary. And yeah, lo and behold, like I find myself there quite often actually now. It's I don't need to go back to that time. I can bring that part of myself into the now.
Mm. Thank you for sharing those tips. They're really interesting. I kind of feel like, yeah, I'd love to go deeper. I always want to go deeper, and I just kind of wonder how as well. You know, I'm always contemplating the meaning. It's a big topic though, isn't it? It's a big topic.
It's a big topic, but my experience is that I don't often find meaning by trying to work it out or trying to think it. Meaning normally finds me.
Okay. Just through your experiences and what you're pursuing, or
yeah, there's a kind of a process of ordering that happens like eventually through experience where, and I don't want to get too kind of woo-woo about it, but there's a sense sometimes of something when I'm in a certain place that kind of guides me towards meaning or understanding. And actually from that place, the wisdom is not something that I have to consider or I have to think about. It's actually already in me. It's just finding the access button. It's like, okay, here it is.
Okay, great. So can you tell us a little bit about you do now? So we always cover in a podcast, if people are in the kind of industry or work where they are supporting others, how do you promote wellness and resilience in other people?
So could you give me the question in a slightly different way, because I didn't fully understand it?
Yeah, so it's a little bit about your work. So I know a little bit about your work, so you can tell us about that, where you are supporting others on their own journeys, and whether you call that wellness or resilience or development or growth. How do you promote that response in others to go on their journeys?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I do and I don't typically conventionally promote like what I do. So most of the time, most of it goes through Facebook. So if you look at my Facebook page, there are specific kind of offers and things like that, but most of it's kind of more like transmission based. It's not really of course, there's a part of me that, you know, wants to make money, you know, needs to make money to do the things that they need to do. But by and large, there's a sense of like, well, when I'm vibrant and alive, like things kind of happen, they work out, things put me in my place. More where I'm focused at the moment, it's not exclusively like I work with beings in all bodies, but more where I'm focused at the moment is with men. So helping men to match their kind of their heart with their sex, and that feels like that might be a little bit like, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
So what that means really is, usually in my experience for men and for my own experience, underneath whatever the sexual proclivity or the desire or the want is some deep, like, emotional core, like a center that needs to be expressed or be explored, and it doesn't actually get expressed through the way that the men connect with their partners sexually.
Mm-hmm.
And they have that longing. So what I'm mostly doing at the moment is helping them to find their own way to start to access those deeper emotions, so that they can get into the root of whatever the problem is, and then start to release that. It's almost like going quite deep, digging into the material, and then getting into feeling, sensation, emotion, and then being able to find ways to release that, and to be able to develop, like I talked about before, not just emotional literacy, but being current with their emotions as well. So what happens as a byproduct of that is that often they can feel a lot more, so they can start to communicate with their partners about how they actually feel, and they can start to behave in a way that is true for them. They can start to get more access to um, we talked about this before, like the Soulshine, so like the feeling of purpose rather than the external goal or outcome. And of course I create goals and outcomes with them as well, so that we can kind of measure that rational journey. But most of the magic comes when they realize that it's actually okay for them to express these deep emotions that they've been holding on to, that there's room for them to breathe and to be themselves. So that's part of the inquiry, is often people come with like an intention or an idea of something that they want to create. It's quite often something very different. Like and you know what? It's always more beautiful than the thing that they imagined that they wanted.
Okay.
Hmm.
So what kind of I don't know, what kind of methods do you use to help people kind of achieve that?
Yeah, so the methods I'm using is a combination of coaching in a kind of sexological bodywork way. So I am helping men to, rather than kind of outsource their sexuality from the outside, so whether that's men, women, whatever the external source that identifies as is, and start to understand like their own kind of inner sexual landscape. And a lot of that is through direct experience. So a really important part of my life, and for many people, is having direct experiences and teaching people what the difference is between an indirect and a direct experience. So helping quite a lot of men to move away from things like pornography. So not as a shame mechanism. Actually, I think I don't have a problem personally with people watching pornography. And when you look at the studies, actually a lot of people who watch pornography have a much more positive opinion of feminist policies, for example. So when you start looking at it through that lens, you start thinking, actually, maybe some people who watch pornography aren't such bad people, and maybe we're overestimating the particular issue on an individual level. So what I'm trying to do is help the men release shame, but at the same time have more direct experiences with their own bodies, so that they can actually teach people how to be with them. You know, it's like, otherwise a lot of men get stuck in performance. It's they're desperate to please their girlfriend or their boyfriend, and it creates like so much tension in their being. And that identification with the giver or the one who's being a man about it, it exhausts them. And they don't really know what they want. So direct experience is one way of finding out what you want, but it's also a way to get in touch with those really deep stuck parts, and those deep, loving, beautiful parts that want to be there in the world, and they're afraid of being seen. So yeah, this is this is one way. Other ways, I'm a trained hypnotherapist as well, so I do a lot of guided application of whatever it is that they want to work on. So, for example, yesterday I developed a series of outcomes with a new client, and today I'm sending them a guided meditation so that they can access their future self and bring it into the now. And the only reason I'm doing that is because actually meditation really suits them. So we're also trying to find the bespoke way that we can help them remove their resistance while simultaneously moving and having momentum so that they don't get stuck. And sometimes it requires heavier lifting, and other times it requires a gentler approach.
I think it's, and it's such important work to help people to reduce shame, especially because it's so damaging, and so it keeps people in a place, doesn't it? And but people feel stuck.
Yeah, shame. The thing about shame is it's never yours. Like you weren't born with it. It was something that was given to you. It's like an inheritance from your culture or from your parents who also grew up in the same, if not a similar culture. So it's very pervasive because it gets internalized like as a part of you, but it's not you. So anything that one can do to start to relax and release some of that would be very useful. I mean, it's a wonderful defense mechanism to stop you from being yourself, but at the same time, it's not true. And you know what? Like most people, we have this idea sometimes that we're at the center of the universe, and everything we do that might be shameful, everyone's going to have a judgment on it. I mean, if you're listening to that and you feel that that might resonate with you, I've got news for you. Like most people don't actually care. Like most people aren't really that bothered. Like if you're on social media and you sometimes send that big post, about your life and what's changing, and you don't send it because you're afraid that X, Y, and Z will judge you. They probably, even if they would, they probably won't care that much anyway. So I would just say, like, just try little things to kind of dissolve that shame. And that actually brings me to an interesting point: is shame often is installed like by beliefs or unconscious beliefs that our parents have. And sometimes it can be, and this is more in the personal self realm, is that everyone and everything we only really see through the lens of the number of different people who are in our immediate family. So the government is our dad, like our school teacher is our mum, like that person that we're coaching is our little brother. It's this is something that's actually that I do work with, and I try to help people to dissolve those kind of transferences where we sort of transfer these relationships into everyone and everything. It's kind of part of the reason why I think we saw so many conspiracy theories going around during the time of COVID, is because people either trust the government too much or they don't trust them enough, and this usually reflects like the relationship that we had with our families. So in a way, it's a kind of collective trauma response that we have, and we normally go one way or the other because trauma polarizes. So it's very rare that we can find ourselves in the center ground. The tension of holding the center ground is like the deepest possible work that one can do. And if one can hold the center ground, not as a kind of performance, but as a truth. So if you have enough empathy to understand both sides, it can be confusing. But if you find a way to bring those two sides together, then you can see that this tension is just, it's resistance, but it's also love. Someone shared something with me once before that tension is just, it's like the tension between two people is love waiting to happen. It's connection waiting to happen. So if you feel tension with a person, get super curious about what can happen to change that tension into connection.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because when we have strong feelings like that, we're usually trying to run away, run away from them instead of see the possibility of it.
We run away, or we fight, or we get stuck, or we try to please the other person. We all have like different responses to these kind of situations. I know some people who I've worked with who actually, when we worked more deeply on what love was, then we realized that anger for them was a way of connecting with people, that it was that was actually something that they took on from their parents, and it was their way of getting close to people. And it completely changed like their relationship with anger, because then they could see like, what's the healthy expression of this anger? I'm passionate. I'm a passionate person. I'm passionate about love. So there's always like a different perspective, like a perspective on a perspective almost. That's soul, actually.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Thank you. We just come to the end, and I've got one last question.
Go for it.
Which is, can you please tell us a value, a strength, or a personality trait that you use that's really strong within you, that you use to support your own wellness?
Yeah, I know the word, I know the value like straight away. Yeah, for me, it's courage. It's always courage. Every moment, it's courage. It's like feeling the fear and doing it anyway. It's acknowledging that, making space for it, and continuing to move towards it. Doesn't have to be fast, but it does need to be. So the courage, I think kur means heart as well. So it's leading with the heart.
Thank you very much. It's been really great to talk to you, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.